Emma needed to stare longingly at her own reflection in the mirror for 34 years to crack the code of her own identity. I can do it just by listening to her ramble for 2 minutes. She's a pompous, self-indulgent, insecure snob. For our daily cancellation today, we have Emma Watson. The Harry Potter actress appeared on the Jay Shetty podcast a few days ago to share her philosophy of life. And the conversation ran for 2.5 hours due to the law that was passed 8 years ago, I think it was, requiring that every podcast interview must be 120 minutes at a minimum. Nobody's allowed to have a 15-minute conversation anymore. If you've noticed, that's because, you see all these and you think, is there some law required? Yeah, there is, actually. You can't just get a quick update about Emma Watson's life if for some reason you were interested in that. Instead, you need her entire life story. We need her to tell us everything she thinks about everything. We need every Emma Watson opinion, thought, musing in one YouTube video. We need a video with a runtime nearly as long as the first Godfather film, except it's just this random celebrity sitting in a chair and rambling. Which, by the way, if you're Joe Rogan, so Joe Rogan came along and his thing was these epically long conversations that are actually interesting. He's really good at that. He's good at having an interesting conversation that goes for 3 hours. But just because he did that and he's good at it and it's popular, it doesn't mean that every podcaster needs it. You don't need to do that. Just so you know, for all the new up-and-coming podcasters out there, I don't think this guy's really up-and-coming, but for all the other podcasters, and you want to do the interview thing, podcast thing, I was like, I don't think we need any more. We've already got plenty of them. But you don't need to go for 2.5 hours, and you really shouldn't, actually. Being able to keep a conversation interesting for that long is like the rarest of skills. Almost no one has that skill. Joe Rogan has it. A few other people have it. You probably don't have it. So just make it a 10-minute interview, 15-minute interview, and we'll move on, okay? Anyway, there was one brief section of this epic saga of an interview that has gotten some attention. Emma spoke out against the violence being inflicted on people, especially young women. But she was not talking about the violent crime epidemic. Certainly was not talking about the problem of political violence, which is being inflicted nearly exclusively by the left on the right. Now, this is a different kind of violence that she's worried about. Listen.
You talked about how getting asked the question, when are you getting married?
Yeah.
Or why aren't you married yet?
Yes.
And that's something every woman's hearing.
Oh my God.
What's your reaction when you hear that?
I'm just so happy not to be divorced yet. That sounds like a really negative answer, but I think that we're being pressured and forced into this thing that I believe is a kind of miracle. I might never be worthy of it. I hope it happens to me. Any point, basically, before about a year ago, it would have been carnage. I just didn't know myself well enough yet. I didn't have a clear enough idea of what my purpose, my vision, how I was going to be of service. I didn't know where I really felt like I needed to be. I think I have some of those answers now. So when I meet someone, I can say, hi, I'm Emma. This is what I care about. This is where the people I love the most live. This is where it's meaningful for me to be in the world. And then they can decide whether they can see that there's a way that I can serve what they're trying to do and they can serve what I'm trying to do. But before that, they would have just got a very mixed signal. I mean, there's some parts of me that have stayed utterly consistent, mm-hmm. but there are some parts that I was really still teasing out and figuring out. And I think it's such a violence and it's such a cruelty on people, and especially young people, I think, and especially women, to make them feel like they have no worth or like they haven't succeeded yet in life because they haven't forced to its culmination something that I just don't think can or should ever be forced.
So the violence that Emma Watson is worried about is the violence of asking somebody when they're going to get married. It's the violence of pressuring young people to get married and have children. And, she'd be making a good point, admittedly, if young people were frequently threatened at gunpoint for not getting married soon enough. But that is not exactly a regular occurrence as far as I know. In fact, in our society, the pressure to get married is not only nonviolent, but is considerably less intense than it's ever been for any generation of young people since like the dawn of humanity. There is more pressure on someone in their early 20s to not get married than there is on someone in their late 20s to get married. It is like inarguable that there is less stigma around being unmarried or marrying late than at any other point in the history of Western civilization. Young people today face less pressure than ever to get married. But they also complain about the meager pressure they do experience more than any other generation ever has. The term shotgun wedding was coined for a reason. It used to have a very literal connotation. And yet, even back then, nobody considered the pressure to get married as an act of violence. That description is only used now at a time when there is, comparatively speaking, basically no pressure. And this is, of course, the pattern on the left. They complain that their lifestyle choices are not accepted. And the more that those choices are accepted, the more they complain about the lack of acceptance. We could throw a parade in every city in the country to celebrate childless cat ladies. We could have a national holiday in their honor. We could renovate the Statue of Liberty so that she's holding a cat and a glass of white wine and engrave the words, "Childlessness is awesome" across the front of it. And still, if even one person amid the cheering throngs looked at Emma slightly askance, or God forbid, asked her when she's getting married, still, she would complain that she's being unfairly pressured. She would claim that she's essentially the victim of a violent crime, which is a very, very close to the exact scenario we've seen with the LGBT camp. Clamoring for acceptance. They get way more of it than they ever should have. And yet their whines and cries of non-acceptance only grow louder. That's how it works with narcissists. Now, putting that aside, what do we make of the rest of Emma's cat lady soliloquy? Well, she says that it would have been carnage had she attempted to get married before she had figured herself out. Or in her words, quoting, "If I had tried to get married at any point before about a year ago, it would have been carnage. I didn't know myself well enough. I didn't have a clear idea of my purpose, my vision, how I was going to be of service. I didn't know where I really felt like I needed to be. I think I have some of those answers now. So when I meet someone, I can say, 'Hi, I'm Emma. This is what I care about. This is where the people I love the most live. This is where it's meaningful for me to be in the world.' And then they can decide whether they can see that there's a way that I can serve what they're trying to do, and they can serve what I'm trying to do." It's not clear why it took her until the age of 35 to figure out where her family lives. I don't know what that means. She can tell people, "This is where my loved ones live." Do you not have GPS? You couldn't have figured that out before? It's also not clear what the phrase, "this is where it's meaningful for me to be in the world" means. She's looking for a meaningful place in the world, but still hasn't figured out how to speak a meaningful sentence. Might be part of your problem. If you want to find meaning in the world, learn how to speak meaningfully. It could be the first step. But if we could sift through all the self-actualization mumbo-jumbo and get to the core of her message, such as there is any kind of core or any kind of message, she appears to be saying that she didn't know herself well enough to get married until about a year ago at the age of 34. So she had to wait until she figured out herself before she could consider getting married. But there are two big problems with that approach. And the first is that it's mostly pretentious, narcissistic nonsense. People like Emma like to think that they're very complex, deeply nuanced, enigmatic, which is why it takes them decades to understand themselves. I mean, you hear this all the time from people. I just got to understand myself. There's so many facets to me. I'm just so complicated. You never know. I don't know. The vast tapestry of my identity is so, I can't get, it's astronomical in its size. I can't get my arms around it. Well, it really isn't that complicated. Emma needed to stare longingly at her own reflection in the mirror for 34 years to crack the code of her own identity. I could do it just by listening to her ramble for 2 minutes. She's a pompous, self-indulgent, insecure snob. So there you go, Emma. I've figured it out for you. That's the answer to the riddle. I have just assembled the jigsaw puzzle of your life for you. Turns out it wasn't like one of those hard puzzles with 1,000 pieces. It was more like a Paw Patrol puzzle for toddlers with 4 pieces. The other problem is that to the extent that you need to sort of come into your own, find yourself, achieve some level of personal growth, none of that is going to happen just by sitting around and thinking about it. Personal growth and discovery are not achieved by mentally and emotionally willing them into existence. And even less are they achieved the way that I suspect Emma thinks she achieved it, by watching a bunch of self-help videos on YouTube and doing yoga. You will grow and figure yourself out by doing, not by thinking in a vacuum, not by feeling in a vacuum, not by meditating, not by trying to self-actualize, but by doing, by taking on the responsibilities of adulthood. You know, I was not mature enough to get married when I got married at the age of 25. And if I waited until this magical moment of maturity to materialize on its own, then I'd still be waiting today at the age of 39. I have grown enough now to be a father and a husband because I became a father and a husband. That's how did I become qualified to be a father and a husband? Well, I became qualified by doing it. Was I qualified before I did it? No. How could I be? I'd never done it before. Am I qualified now? Yeah, I've been doing it for 14 years. You grow and come into your own through responsibility and through obligation and expectation. This is what I think a lot of people, young people, and people in my generation miss. This obligation, expectation, responsibility, you can't wait. You can't say, well, I'll take on all that stuff when I feel like I'm ready. You'll never be ready. That is the fire in which your grown adult self will be forged. And if you wait until you feel ready to enter into that fire, you'll never be ready. You need to be in the fire to be ready for it. And I don't mean to say that family life is like being burned alive in a fire. I'm not trying to say that. I'm only saying that you need friction, you need pressure, you need toil, you need work in order to create anything good, anything worthwhile. And this is true, especially true when it comes to creating your own mature, responsible, competent, unselfish adult self. Now, Emma has spent nearly 2 decades of her adult life trying to get herself mentally and emotionally prepared to be a grown woman, to be a wife and a mother. But after all that time, she's no more prepared at 35 than she was at 25 or 22. Like, you can't learn how to swim by sitting around and staring at the pool. It doesn't matter how long you stare at it. You could stare at it for 10 years. You walk up to the pool, you don't know how to swim. You say, I'm going to sit here and look at it and think about it until I'm ready. 20 years later, you're still going to be just as unqualified to jump in the pool as you were when you first got there. There's no way to do it except by getting into the water. And Emma, like many women in her generation and many men, has refused to get in the water. And now she thinks she'll be able to swim flawlessly just because she's psyched herself up for it. If anything, that false confidence will make her more likely to drown, not less. And the same is true of marriage. By waiting, by spending nearly 2 decades of adult life living for herself, all she's done is create habits of selfishness that will make marriage more difficult, more challenging. Not impossible, still worth doing, but it actually adds difficulties. So she has achieved the opposite of what she intended. But at least she knows where her family lives now or something. So that's at least one positive. And that is why Emma Watson is today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.